Why, hello there. Today is day 673 since Elden Ring was first announced at E3 2019, and we're here with the Elden Wait, and I am joined today by a pretty prolific back in the day Souls YouTube person who now does Twitch streaming, Quelaag. Thanks for joining me today, Quelaag.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so when I first got into Dark Souls, you were one of the people that was like, "Oh, there's a story in Dark Souls," and it's really cool actually. So I'm very excited to be talking with you today, and just as someone who inspired me to like actually get into the Souls games because I sort of hit that wall, and then
Yeah,
I turned to YouTube to what's the story? If I won't play the game, I might as well listen to the story and find out. And then creators like you, Epic Name Bro, Vadi back in the day, a few podcasts, they were all people who encouraged me to be like, oh, actually, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and if you dig a little bit, so it's great to be talking to you today. And
thank you. And I actually want to give a shout out to the Drakengard series because that when I grew up playing those games, they have all the weapons with descriptions,
yeah,
and that trained my brain into always reading item descriptions no
yeah,
matter what. So that series definitely shaped my interest in eventually the Soul series and
yeah,
other kinds of even Dragon Age has item descriptions that have little stories and
hmm,
stuff in them. So
yeah, for
it's
sure.
always fun.
So
Yeah.
so now since Dark Souls 1, so the Souls series, especially for those of us who have sort of been following it since Demons or Dark Souls 1, it's been a while now. So where are you generally just with the Souls games at this point? Like, and sort of what's your attitude approaching Elden Ring, which is sort of seemingly a return to like a Dark Souls type game?
Um, I'm excited. I always just like fantasy action combat no matter what. I'll play
Mhm.
whatever. But in terms of it kind of being a return to the same setting, I kind of wonder on the back end a lot about how the developers and art directors and everybody feel about it. I think that you tend to get the most out of video games when you can tell it's like a labor of love.
Hmm.
And you can almost kind of tell sometimes when video game developers are kind of having to just rehash the same idea over and over and over again because it's
Hmm.
what sells. But I loved their breakaway titles like Bloodborne and Sekiro are definitely some of my favorites of the series. And so there's a part of me that's like, oh, I really hope that they feel that creative freedom
Hmm.
while they're working on this title. So I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of I know frustration between Dark Souls 2 and then also there's some parts of 3 that a lot of people were frustrated by. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So how did you sort of feel with the progression of Dark Souls in particular? Just because, I'm sort of in the camp of I really liked Dark Souls. I really like all of the games, but narratively,
Yeah.
as someone who sort of approaches from a story point of view as my main motivator to sort of play through the games, I did start to feel like at Dark Souls 3, like it was all a bit much or a bit convoluted. So, how did you sort of feel about the progression of the series?
So it's actually my relationship with the games have changed a
Mhm.
ton over time, especially from when I first made those videos.
Yeah.
Because when I kind of first started recording and breaking things down, it was at a really fundamental level. Like I was just reading the text, like kind of reading it and taking it for what it was, and then I was able to kind of use things that I was familiar with, mythology and all that stuff, to kind of be like, oh, I wonder if this is what he's trying to say. But as I've kind of gotten older, and I've started talking to a few more people just about it, whether it's people that I've met from YouTube or, there's other people in the community that I'm probably going to name
Yeah.
drop when we talk about this. But in particular, I've been talking to my friend Ross. He's Twin Perfect on YouTube.
Okay.
He did this big Twin Peaks video that
Ooh.
is pretty
Oh,
controversial,
really?
but he's a pretty good video essayist.
Okay.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. But he and I have been in a lot of conversations today. I can't unfortunately share his opinion on certain things, but I align with him a lot
Yeah.
on the way that we are kind of consuming media. where we look for symbols, like visual symbols, but also like look really deep at interviews and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like that creative intent.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, there's a lot that's changed as I've gotten to know Miyazaki as a creator and like as he's been putting out more and more and more
Mm-hmm.
projects. It's almost like you get to learn his language and
Yeah.
you get to kind of see these like common threads that he likes to talk about.
Yeah.
Like from when I first played Demon Souls, and it was just like, this is a cool Western
Yeah.
fantasy done by a Japanese developer.
Yeah.
And there's some like berserk stuff in it and some cool like social psychology in it. But it goes from that to, there's lots of reoccurring symbols throughout the entire series,
Mm-hmm.
like, and even stuff that I've seen in Elden Ring too.
Yeah.
That it's interesting to see his like language kind of developing, like his mythos kind of developing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like my own sort of
Also,
empathy.
my dog's gonna start. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, it's very similar, I think, with myself, where like a lot of my content that I like to produce is a lot of basically like interview quotes and stuff, because it's it's more for me almost about From Software's creators. And
Sorry.
oh, no problem. But I also like to follow them as creators and sort of what they're intending to do. And
Yeah.
if you aren't familiar with, you should look up sometime, and I can link it to you, is a creator named Theomony, and
Yeah.
she likes to look at From Software since Kingsfield and look at sort of
Yeah.
similar themes, because they are uniquely a studio where they will play with the same ideas over time, and really you do start to get that sort of personal, like if you've been playing their games for a long time, you can start to read things and sort of understand where they're coming from without it really explaining it to you, because they the use of like trees and the sun and stuff. It's been in so many of their games that you start to be able to sort of read into almost like a studio mythology, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word.
Yeah, and there's also even objects and items that have appeared,
Hmm.
since day one,
Yeah.
like even, the Moonlight Greatswords in Armored Core, or
Yeah.
like you see all those little things, or even Patches, I think is in Armored Core too,
Yep.
from what I remember. He's like one of the pilots. And one of my favorite sigils that I used to put on my mech was there's a blue blood organization
Yeah.
that's in the core universe, and it has like a fluted night helm.
Mm.
It's called Blue Blood, which is kind of like Blue Blood Sword.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see like all these little tiny things that definitely refer to like the studio's mythos, and then
Hmm.
also like Miyazaki as a director and a creator too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And the point you had about creating games is like a passion. Like that's always what I really hope for, especially with From Software developer who I really follow pretty intensely for almost a decade now, is like, hoping that they're really doing something out of a labor of love. And I sort of my own you could feel that with Sekiro, just some of the interviews and like everything Game Informer did. They seemed really excited to be getting to do like a game set in Japan, because it had been so long, and as a studio it had been such a long time since they had gone back to sort of a culture that's closer to home, and just you could tell that they were really excited to break away. And I do hope also that like as we actually get interviews for Elden Ring and new information, that I do sort of hope it is a case of like, well, we still like the genre, but Dark Souls as a world was feeling like a constraint, and not so much Bandai Namco was really pushing for more action RPGs in a dark fantasy world, and this was sort of what we went to. And I think and I hope that having something like George R. R. Martin in there is a really unique opportunity. And just from what we've read, it seems like Miyazaki is earnestly a fan of George R. R. Martin's work, and that I think, and I'm curious to get your opinion, is like, I don't know how well you know George R. R. Martin and his works, if you're really into him, but I think when they're creating a mythology, like I think From is super good at like these really evocative concepts, but it'll be interesting to have someone like Martin who's so detailed in his worlds, and to provide them like probably I would assume their most like fleshed out sort of mythology that they probably ever had to work with. And I'm curious if
Yeah.
that like lets them do their cool From Software. They tell you like 80% of the story sort of thing, and they're not, like, because I think from Dark Souls, one of my own changing viewpoints is like when I first played Dark Souls is like, man, they thought of every single detail, and the more you sort of look at it, the more you're like, well, they've really had concepts in mind, but also they were sort of intentionally leaving stuff, and they probably never had an answer for some of the stuff that people have spent hours debating, and that's totally fine because that was kind of what they were doing. And it'll be cool to
Yeah.
have that sort of background probably exist, and it'll be interesting to see how much of that they actually give to us this time around.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how Miyazaki and his writing style are going to work because based on like things that we've seen from the game, whether it's screenshots, there's, like a lot of symbols that we've seen throughout the series, and also from the leak, which I know
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be watching the main trailer, but like things like trees
Yeah.
or the sun or those symbols that we were talking about, they're still present in the imagery that we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing. But I have a feeling that George R. R. Martin's probably going to focus more on like the character dynamic because he's so well known for like his character and like social and
Yeah.
political like
Mm-hmm.
writing. Like
Yeah.
that's like the core part of his work. So I can definitely see him fleshing out that aspect of
Mm-hmm.
it, while all the symbols and religious iconography and other stuff that Miyazaki specializes in is still going to be there.
Oh yeah.
So I'm assuming that that's what it's. I'm hoping that's what it's going to be like, but
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm excited to be surprised. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I think it sort of messes with what we're used to, and just having this outside, like I think stimulus, as it's translated, that Miyazaki refers to Martin's work as, just like bringing in, because he's going to come with his own background influences, and I assume that they come together over things like Dungeons and Dragons and like other topics that they're both super familiar with and have obviously influenced their works. But yeah, like with the leaked footage, like it's so from software, like Sea of Fog, like you said, the giant tree, the sort of with the sun there, and just like there's so many things that were so evocative of stuff they've done before, just like in, sailing across the sea is like something it's not done so much in Souls, but Kingsfield, they're always going to an
Mhm.
island or like shipwrecking. So it's like there's so much of that that just felt sort of reassuring as like, oh, it's still extremely from software. And I imagine that when they approached Martin, they already had ideas. I don't ever know how much I want to carry this idea, but in Dark Souls 3 with like the Millwood Knights, and the Millwood
Mhm.
Knights had the symbol on their shields and stuff is the ethereal oak, and then you see in Elden Ring this like transparent tree, and it's really hard not to think like, oh, they already had something in mind because they like to do like tiny nods towards whatever they're working on at the time. So it's
Yeah,
interesting to wonder how much of that was in process in the studio at that time.
and it's weird because I didn't notice as many Elden Ring references in Bloodborne and Sekiro,
Hmm.
or sorry, not Elden Ring, Kingsfield,
Yeah,
but it's everywhere in Dark Souls,
yeah,
and that's why it kind of feels like Elden Ring is like a return to that format of kind of making it onto that because Seath
yeah,
and all of that was like a whole plot line in Dark Souls. It was
yeah,
different, but
yeah,
it was there.
yeah,
Um, so it's interesting. It's interesting to see what he's going to take
yeah.
and what he's going to kind of make into his own. So
Yeah. Yeah, so when do you tend to follow, like, are you someone who goes dark on interviews at any point, or are you sort of like in a camp sort of like me where like as interviews are coming out and trailers and information, like I tend to eat all that up, not just because I make content, but because I am just super curious to get as much information as I can to sort of indicate where From Software is coming from and sort of what they're hoping to get out of it. Is that sort of your own trajectory with
yeah,
following it?
so it's been a little interesting. I have like a few reasons why, but typically with games, if I'm really excited about them, I like follow them and read absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important. I was actually talking to Ross about this recently, but the whole concept of like death of the author,
Mm-hmm.
um, even though that is becoming like a much more like I guess like popular thing, people tend to like dismiss creative intent, especially if the story's message is very vague or there's missing pieces. A lot of people really like to come to their own conclusions and their own like throughout their own experiences and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But him and I tend to both kind of lean more in the camp of like when we've talked about stuff, it's like, oh no, let's really like dig into interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm definitely more of an interview person. I think that the game development world was really interesting to me when I started making videos. And then also even film directing too was
Mm-hmm.
super interesting to me. Um, Kind of like in my early 20s. It was super, I guess, like valuable to me. But it
Yeah.
was weird because I didn't think I was going to end up in the game industry. I was actually working as a behavioral therapist for
Mm-hmm.
about 6 years. And then I transferred out of that and now I work at Microsoft.
Okay.
And because of that, there's like a weird relationship that I have with video games now,
Yeah.
especially seeing the back end and seeing the user research and development that goes into a lot of like video games. I I think that like I don't know, it's just so odd like how my relationship with all that stuff has changed because then you start looking at things like video games which have much bigger production studios than like movies or indie games, and you kind of have to like sift through the weeds of like, okay, well you have all these people working on this particular thing. You know, who's really like I guess like Miyazaki has the final say, but there's a lot of politics and stuff going in there with producers
Yeah.
and with like, you know, even when you hear stories about Namco Bandai or
Mm-hmm.
you hear things about FromSoft's relationship with production studios in general, who's telling them what to do, you know, like how much creative freedom have they had,
Yeah.
how true to the vision were they able to be. They're questions that come up a lot in my
Mm-hmm.
mind working in the industry, like, and I'm kind of curious to see where we end up with Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see Miyazaki's journey.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question. It was kind of a tangent, but
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It made it got me thinking just because I'm interested in a lot of the same things, but obviously I'm not in the games industry, so it's a lot of poking around, and with From Software, sort of all you have access to is poking around. So
yeah,
like the leaked trailer for me, on the one hand, I always think it's a bummer when like a developer is working so hard and something comes out, but on the other hand, I would be lying if I didn't say like a part of me was excited because it's a recognizing it as very much a progress snapshot is like something we don't get access to, and to see where they're at this point is super interesting. And I was sort of wondering
yeah,
too if you'd look if you dug into the Digic concept art that was for the announcement trailer. There was some concept art that had been put out, I think, by someone who was freelance with Digic, and his NDA was up, and it was he thought it was okay to put up the images now because it had been a certain number of years. And so that was our like look into some of the concept art for the trailer, and that was super fascinating to me, and I've spent plenty of time on my channel sort of looking at some of those progress shots, because one thing that I thought was interesting was that if you've seen the concept art, there's so much tree imagery. Like the person, if they're like a tree spirit or whoever they're usually called like the blacksmith by the community. But they're wielding. We found out through that they're wielding a scepter, and that the thing they're hitting is a dais. And I thought it was interesting that there was so many roots, including like on the blacksmith person, and then a lot of that went away in favor of like stone imagery, while also still sort of evoking through the cracking on their body and stuff like almost like a root like form, even if it's totally different in its appearance now. And
yeah,
stuff like that's fascinating to me because right now, who knows what that means, but like, it'll be interesting to take that someday and be able to retroactively sort of peek back at that and say, oh, what did this mean for like how they were handling this theme, and did this change over the course of development? So
yeah. And I think a lot about the leaked content too, because there were, like we talked about, a lot of the same reoccurring things like roots, trees,
mm-hmm.
sunlight. But I think a lot about how much of that is going to change in the
Mm-hmm.
final product, because like seeing the leaked footage, like you said, it's a huge bummer. Like
Yeah.
you never want that to happen as a game developer. There is like some degree of excitement that I get as a fan, so
Yeah.
I still have that, and I still have that like whole analysis part of me where I'm like, oh, what concepts are they going to be sticking with
Yeah.
in this next installment? But also knowing, I can't really talk about which games I worked on, but working in the like not like kind of working in the games industry builds from week to week with bigger teams. Like
Mhm.
if you have a big team that you're working with, um, games from week to week don't even look the same.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a lot of people who have done QA testing. I was more on the research and like um, there's like some other stuff that I worked on, but um, yeah, it changes so
Yeah.
fast. Things move so fast and they change so fast.
Yeah.
So this leak that came out, it's like, you know, so much of that can change from the final product,
Yeah.
but um it's cool. It's cool to see all of that there. And like even those giants that are like pulling,
Yeah.
they have chains and stuff
Hmm.
strapped to them. They almost look really similar to the hollow design. And that's like a design that's carried through the series as well,
Yeah.
where it looks like someone's being engulfed by roots
Yeah.
or trees.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. I personally hope that design stays because I think that's a really cool incarnation of like whether or not it's like the Dark Souls 2 giants or the hollows,
Mhm.
like that whole thing of like the chest cavity basically being hollowed out, but yeah, and then
Yeah.
but now instead they have these really sort of stoic like is there was a Chinese content creator who referenced the Green Man, which
Mm.
is a slight tangent. I'm learning if the myth of the Green Man in like English churches, there's often
Yeah.
like this like face with like leaves or roots coming off of it. The more I dug into that, the more I learned that that was probably something that folklorists kind of accidentally read a lot into and thought that it really tied in deeply into these like Celtic pagan beliefs, and it may. But I found that the Green Man is essentially a product of England in just like churches, and then the rest is kind of unknown. It's lost like a lot of like Celtic history, a lot of Norse history, but just still that evocative look, and it does start getting you wondering like even if that's not exactly what they're pulling from. They have this recurring history and how they're twisting it this time. And I also think just idea of being rooted. Again, my friend Theomony was talking about just how that rooted imagery in their game so often is like almost like this voracious hunger to like take the life sort of out of things, and how trees they're affected by the environment and the water, and how you can see enemy designs like that, and you start to get this idea like you can clearly tell from the leaked trailer like again these giant creatures are like being treated like worse than livestock. Like they have like these like it looks almost like harpoons through their chests, and then they're just being
Hmm.
forced to sort of walk around, and it gets me so excited about the world. But as you said, at the same time, like when I talked with Dan Tack of Game Informer, he was saying when he went to go visit From Software for Dark Souls 3, he came back, and then by the time he came back and was about to publish the article, Bandai Namco had requested he not talk about some mechanics because they were gone from the game, and like just like and it's just very interesting to see like if that could happen over the course of a few months. If this footage is like 2 years old, 1 year old, even like it could mean tons for how much you can read from it. But it's still just fascinating just to get the developer's headspace. Even though sometimes I feel like, as someone who digs so hard into that, how much it feels a little fruitless sometimes, but then you get something like this, and it really helps to sort of, you know, at least a small breadcrumb trail to sort of lead you.
Hmm.
And the another thing I was wondering, so once we actually get this game in like 2025 or who knows when, um,
Whatever.
do you tend to like what's your do you have any sort of routine with games you're really looking forward to like this? Like do you tend to go hard into them, or do you just sort of do you look up stuff on the internet? Are you like averse to like spoilers, or do you like to get right into the larger conversation, or what's sort of your flow for
No.
this?
So for people that have been following me, they kind of know that I just face roll my first playthrough.
Yeah.
Like I'll almost always have my community pick which build I'm going to go through, and it is typically a build that I hate. Like
Yeah.
from I started doing this with Dark Souls 2, and almost always people pick quality
Yeah.
right out the gate. And typically, quality requires like quite a bit of planning. Like you have to figure out which weapons scale the best, and
Yeah.
all this other stuff. And when you're playing a game for the first time completely blind, finding those weapons that complement your build, it's kind of difficult to do.
Yeah.
So I always have a hard, rough time my first time playing through Souls games because
Yeah.
my community likes to punish me a lot. But so we usually do like a stream of just the first playthrough, and then the second playthrough, I'll typically like look up how to get certain
Yeah.
things, or I'll like try to figure, out how to get like all the different endings.
Mm.
But I almost always kind of like uncover secrets on my own just
Yeah.
by exploring.
Yeah.
It's like one of my favorite parts of the series.
Yeah.
Like I found the Great Hollow by myself without like a walkthrough or a guide,
Yeah.
just because I was like, I kept hitting the walls behind the chests because I was like, this can't be for nothing. Like I've been hanging out in the swamp
Yeah.
for like hours. Like I can't know. And
Yeah.
there was little signs everywhere that were like, keep going, keep going.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I think that there's like this aspect of playing it blind that I really love because like you get to interact with the community
Mm-hmm.
right away.
Yeah.
Like with the comment systems and with the co-op and the
Yeah.
the PvP and everything. So that's usually like kind of where I go. But in terms of making videos, I haven't. I mean, like we talked about kind of earlier before this, I haven't made lore videos in a long time, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of that has to do with how my relationship with the series has changed
Mm.
over time. And then I keep thinking about making like, maybe I should make like a new lore series, or maybe I should kind of revamp my videos to talk about how my opinions have changed as I've read more and like have gone through my higher education and have kind of been forced to, because I don't know, like you're forced to read a lot of like mythology and spiritual books and stuff
Yeah.
with the major that I went down. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot like that I wish that I could touch on, but I just
Mm-hmm.
it's so hard these days to find time for
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So we're sticking to streaming.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's as we were talking about before we got into it, is like, yeah, it is tough to say. Like when Sekiro came out, I had all these grand plans, and then I realized that it was honestly not my place to dig deep into Shinto beliefs because I am not qualified, and so that sort of fell through. But so I'm keeping it a little looser with Elden Ring, but from all I can tell, it's much more stuff that I'm familiar with, and but it is tough because you're like, am I going to script out this like 10-page thing to really get my ideas down? When at least the last year for me, it's felt like it's just, as a creator, like if I want to get my ideas out, it might only be like 75% as polished if I just blurt it out, and it'll be a lot more verbose, but it's more fun. And
Yeah.
and it's sort of like I'm on YouTube, but I can still feel that thing where like I'm much more interested in like the community aspect and just talking with people, and like you get that through Twitch, and like if people miss your big theories, well, oh well, it's like they can watch the videos, and if not, but it's like it is just too much work sometimes to just like really get your official stance on something out there if it requires you to like do 10 hours of video editing to find the perfect images, when you could just like
Yeah.
walk around in the game and just sort of blurt stuff out and basically get to the same place. At least my mind can
Yeah.
calm down after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that like there's something about fluid conversation too that like almost offers the ability to like change your mind.
Yeah.
Like if you're having a conversation with somebody and they teach you something new, it's a lot easier for like that stance to be like perceived as more malleable or like
Yeah.
changing. But on YouTube, when you write a video essay, it's like that's it. Like there's no conversation about it except
Yeah.
in the comments, but
Yeah.
it's like it makes people, feel as if like maybe their input doesn't matter,
Yeah.
or like sometimes I can feel like your word is final when that's not the case.
Yeah.
Like a lot of this is kind of like bits and pieces of it are up for interpretation, but kind of talking like going revisiting something that you said a little bit earlier, where you were saying that like Sekiro is more rooted in Shinto belief. One of the things that I've been talking a lot to my friend about, the one who's making the Dark Souls lore video soon, I'm still gonna like keep promoting him because
Yeah.
since he's doing a new lore video, it's like I don't have to do
Oh yeah.
anything. He can do it. But we were actually talking about how Miyazaki uses both Western and Eastern
hmm
religious iconography across both games.
Yeah.
And you see that. I think there was an interview with Miyazaki that it's like one of my favorite interviews where he talks about how he used to try to read um, or like would kind of like read loose translations of Western mythos,
hmm
but the translations didn't quite like there was some weird like disconnect there. I forget if he was actually like reading it himself
hmm
like English or if it was like a loose translation of a myth. But he said that there was this disjointed like aspect of it that made it feel like kind of weird and surreal because like it's
hmm
not, there's like a cultural disconnect and
Yeah.
like a language barrier and all this other stuff that's happening, but it makes consuming media like from other countries like really interesting because there's this like mystery kind of.
Yeah.
But I find that he is really really big on like blending um, the two
Yeah.
and trying to kind of bridge that gap of like his experiences with Western culture
Yeah.
a little bit. And you see that with one of my favorite boss designs out of any of the Souls games. I actually still stand by the fact that Demon Souls is like my favorite
Yeah.
Souls game, even though it's a lot of people hate it because it's you know based on like game mechanic wise, it hasn't aged as like great as Bloodborne. Bloodborne's aged like a fine wine, but Demon Souls is definitely like a little chunky. But the old monk design
Yeah.
is one of my favorite designs. There's like very Eastern style icons, but then behind him is this big like fixture, like this big art fixture that's very Western
Yeah.
looking. And then also, you're talking about with the trees. There's tons of things in Western mythology, like Yggdrasil,
hmm
and like the Green Man, and all the nature that we see with like the Catholic Church's crusades and like their relationship with like all the different cultures that they were
Yeah.
conquering and how they would take their iconography and stuff. But there's also a lot of iconography in the East about trees
Yeah.
and about roots in particular that Ross is gonna so kindly talk about.
Mm.
So I'm
Yeah.
excited for him to put that video up
Yeah.
and for the conversation to kind of get sparked up because I feel like there's a lot of really good stuff out there.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it did get me thinking about something we sort of touched on, but just you have that. I could only imagine that when it came to like George R. R. Martin and Miyazaki and From getting together, that those commonalities that they shared as like a basis for design, and I think that is such an interesting thing, and I'm totally with you. I think for me, part of the appeal of Dark Souls and part of the appeal for a lot of people is it's very much a dark fantasy game, but not a Western dark fantasy game. It's not really,
Yeah,
it's not like Japanese or Western. It's this interesting thing, and and that was one thing I appreciated about Sekiro is because I kind of felt like I could finally be in that zone where I don't really know some of the stuff that is being shown to me, but I can sort of accept it on sort of a face value and still enjoy it while also recognizing that there's other stuff happening that I'm just not familiar with, like the iconography, because there's tons of stuff in there, but also it's a really cool adventure because then you're like, oh, those monks are pretty messed up, and then you're like, oh, those monks are based off of like real monks who tried to mummify themselves, and then you're like, wow, like like From Software, as much as they can come up with some pretty messed up stuff, like real life is much darker sometimes, and like it's
yeah,
just such a cool learning experience because then I feel like I get to understand something better while also seeing it in this evocative translated sort of heightened fantasy version, and that's what I really look forward to with just getting into a world like Elden Ring. It's been my sort of argument is that we haven't really had like big world from to dig into since Dark Souls 1, because Dark Souls 2 and 3 were extensions, even though they weren't. Dark Souls 3 was kind of a straight sequel, but Dark Souls 2 and 3, they were still built in that world. In Bloodborne, which is probably my favorite game of all time, but it's not really that thing about different kingdoms and lands. It's very much a focused story, sort of
Yeah.
about Yarnum, and then how it ties into this big cosmic thing going on. But you're not finding about like Astora and Vinheim and just these like sound sorceries and just these things that I found so interesting in Dark Souls, where they never really flesh it out, but they just say it, and it's so cool. And it just is something where, for me at least, I'm sitting at work and I'm like, oh, what are sound sorcerers like? And it's exciting to get back to something like Elden Ring, where it's just a big fantasy world, and it's just like, hopefully they'll just be throwing stuff at the wall, because at least my sort of interpretation of From's work is like they have 1,000 ideas and they throw them all at the wall, and then they
Sorry.
and then they sort of see what sticks, and they pull from there. So it's just someone who sort of likes a big fantasy world to pull apart. I'm excited that for like essentially, you had Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and then there was a big gap in which they were sort of exploring different things. Sekiro is like fantasy Japan. It's just like it wasn't the same, because it's just not that big fantasy world where you're just coming to with a blank canvas. And Elden Ring is hopefully, I think, sort of that opportunity, and now they're tackling a bigger scale. And I don't always know how to interpret that. How do you feel about them like getting into like the idea of it being more of like an open world? Like, do you feel like that's a natural extension for them, or do you think it's a really interesting move for just what you've seen from as a longtime fan?
I feel like that almost feels like a natural extension. I think there's like the Metroidvania aspect of their games where it's like, um, you know, especially Dark Souls 1, the map layout was so much like a
Yeah.
Castlevania or a Metroid game where
Mm,
it all interconnected, but certain places weren't accessible to you until you got certain items, like the
yep.
Lord Vessel or whatever. So it was kind of like you would have to go back to where, like, retrace your steps and try to figure out where to go next. It
Hmm.
was kind of like a maze if you didn't have a walkthrough or anything.
Yeah.
And I really do love that aspect of it. I know a lot of like diehard, like Metroid and Castlevania fans that I'm friends with love that format. That's like their
Yeah.
all-time favorite. I personally don't mind so long as whatever format they're doing is done well. I think it would be interesting to see them tackle an open world game, especially because, like you were mentioning, with the different cultures that you kind of hear about or the different places. I feel like Miyazaki and George R. R. Martin both really love that.
Yeah.
Like, they really love putting in other cultures and designs and armor and magic from different parts of the world, and then
Yeah.
you see it like come from another continent to the continent that the story takes place, and it seems so like foreign and interesting and
Yeah.
like magical. You kind of want to go back to that place. So I feel like that would be a really cool thing for both
Yeah.
Miyazaki and Martin to tackle because they both are masters at that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where you just don't know how it's gonna turn
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Like mentioning the leaked trailer, like the ending scene where they're showing this like Onmyoji looking person who's like extremely Eastern compared to everything else. It really got me
Yeah.
like, oh, where are they gonna take this? Like, is this a like From Software tends to like to have like a character from the East. So I was like, is it like
Mhm.
that? But this kind of looks like a boss. I'm like, is this being a more open world their chance to like really take like a more like Japanese themed landscape, and because they're doing an open world just smash that against some western stuff? Because in the leak trailer they mentioned the rift lands, and I may be off base, but it kind of reminded me of Dark Souls 3, where Lothric is like this convergence, and just wondering like, oh, if this Elden Ring is something that controls reality, does that mean the Riftlands are like this artificial place that perhaps when the Elden Ring was shattered or something, it shattered reality, and pieces or parts of it were scattered, and it's also kind of, we mentioned From Software likes to retackle similar things. Like if the Elden Ring had a physical representation, if it was trying to draw landscape back, and that's probably playing into my own. I'm an architect in my day job, so like the idea of messing with space and having, and that's been something in the series always, like the fact that space in Dark Souls 1, like time is weird, and then in Dark Souls 2 your character is moving through what we assume is sort of a logical kingdom, but you move through it illogically because of the curse. And then Dark Souls 3 is
Yeah.
just straight up your character is moving through an illogical space, but they seem to be moving through it as if it's normal. And it just makes me wonder, like, they're always interested in playing with how time and space sort of interact, and if they'll continue to do that. Because it's interesting that Miyazaki mentions how they're taking Elden Ring as an opportunity to tackle new themes and ideas, but there's the part of me that can't help but just see so many like threads of things that they've done before, and just being a longtime fan, it's hard to interpret that and actually think it's going to be totally new ideas, but more like a new take, because everything about the Souls series to me is very iterative versus just like they don't scrap ideas, they just sort of recontextualize them if it's something interesting. And so I can't help but feel like the Riftlands, or that seeing that extremely like sort of Asian aspect, got me excited to think, oh, are they really gonna blend cultures in a more significant way than just like Bed of Chaos, for instance?
Yeah, and I think that we've seen that a lot throughout the whole series. Like I mentioned with the old monk, he's always done that. Even in Sekiro, there's the night
Yeah.
boss that you fight.
Yep.
There's always, it always seems like there is one NPC, or uh, what was it, Shiva of the East?
Yep.
Shiva of the East. There's always people that are coming across,
Yeah.
these boundaries that Miyazaki talked about in that one interview about reading, like a Japanese person reading Western folklore or mythology. What would it also be like for a Western person to read Japanese folklore and mythology? And then what would it be like for these two things to kind of converge?
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to like spiritual stuff, because we almost always see that convergence happen with spiritual,
Yeah.
Ideas.
Yeah.
So yeah, like once again, old monk,
Yeah.
Bed of Chaos also it's kind of tied to some other stuff too, but um I would say more Lost Izalith is more like not necessarily like the Chaos Covenant or the Chaos Sisters are Eastern necessarily, but definitely the architecture that they exist in is. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know. I'm curious to see how Martin and him are going to like blend the content together, because Martin is a Western author and Miyazaki is an Eastern director. So once again, it's a convergence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'll be there's so many questions that will only be answered by actually getting more information somewhere down the road. But yeah, it is exciting though for them to tackle anything else. What else? I'm just curious. Just being a longtime fan of From Software, what beyond Elden Ring, is there anything else that you're hoping for the studio to produce otherwise? Like you mentioned Armored Core before. Would you like them to finally sort of reboot Armored Core?
I miss Armored Core.
Yeah.
I miss it so much. Thankfully, though, I have the Nier series.
Yeah.
That has kind of, it's not the same in the sense of like customizing your own mech,
Yeah.
but it deals with like, transhumanism and, androids. And there's kind of like those narratives that I really love. Like I've always really liked like cyberpunk type narratives. Armored Core had that a lot because it was about like a dystopian like economic future. Like everything was just screwed. And so people would like engage in war. It was really Ghost of the Shell
Yeah.
in terms of like nations would go to war for resources. And they would have resource wars. But yeah, I want to say, was Miyazaki on 4? I want to say he was on 4.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think he got his start, I think, in like Raven. I don't know the series super well, but Raven, he was like a level designer. Then he was directing in 4, and then 4 Answer, I think.
Oh yeah.
So
4 was like my favorite. Like easily hands down my favorite one. The soundtrack was on point, but the story played out very similar to Souls games. For people that haven't played it, you had the narrator kind of narrate that first little bit of the game, but then as you would progress through the game, you would get in fights, and the only thing that would inform you on like the drama that was going on was the weird dialogue that you would have with bosses.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like disjointed and made you feel like, oh shit, like did I do the right thing? Like I want to learn more about like what's going on in their country. Like there's like this kind of this narrative going on that was kind of like pre Dark Souls. Like he kind of had, or pre Demon Souls even. He kind of like started planting those seeds. But I love the way he tells stories and mysteries too. Like he's a really good mystery writer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love for him to make another Armored Core. Although, you know, if it's not his thing, if he was just rebooting it because that was From Software's like IP at the time, like that was kind of their bigger IP.
Yeah.
I totally understand. 5 just like it sucked to play as somebody that lived in North America.
Yeah.
I don't know how it was in China or Japan, but I know that like I remember because there's territory wars, like. So communities would take over like the whole map, and I remember like pretty much like I want to say it was like people like players in China and then like 4chan like took over everything and that was like it. So I don't know, it was weird, like the IP just like didn't know what it was wanting to do, and it was a little, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. I miss it.
It was really wild to me to learn that like Dark Souls 2 was coming out and there was another Armored Core game, because you know, like the marketing on that was like must have been non-existent, because I was already pretty invested in From Software and I had no clue that an Armored Core game had come out. So it's, you know, it would be interesting to see like what they do with that now. I haven't played through the series, but I would be down to see what they would do. But of course, as you're saying, like it's interesting that from Software, I know a lot of the Armored Core veterans have left and gone on to do their own things elsewhere. So it does beg the question, because I know like Miyazaki, and it seems like From Software as a studio, Miyazaki mentioned that he's really interested in tackling some of their older games they did, and like so Deracine was sort of like an Echo Knight. Like I think the Echo Knight director was like on Deracine, so like he's very interested in going back, but he's also very respectful of like if he feels like it's not his place to tackle something. So it'd be interesting because he did work on Armored Core, but does he feel like it's something that the studio has the right people to tackle in a respectful way?
I feel like they could, because they started. I almost feel like they're branching out in terms of like their XYZ axis, because Dark Souls is very like obviously like you play on the ground, you don't hop around. But Sekiro is very vertical, like you are going up and you know slingshotting around. I feel like they have the you know the technical structure to be able to do it, and the framework of how Dark Souls works is really similar to Armored Core. So like the right and left shoulder buttons are control the right side of your mech, and then the left you know trigger and shoulder button control the left side of your mech. So it's really similar to how like you know you block with the left trigger and you do stuff with your right arm with the right trigger. The controller's always like split in half that way. So like they have that same like design philosophy carried over from Armored Core into the Souls games. So it would be interesting to see if they'd be able to pull it off. I think they could.
I would be totally for that, and I hope for my own personal thing, like I would love to see From Software tackle a straight up horror game, like go back to like Kuon, you know, maybe not Kuon, but like something like Kuon, because I've only watched like Let's Plays of it, but like I know that at the time it was sort of called like a Resident Evil clone, but like it's a pretty fun game, and I think From Software is still so good at horror that I would love to see what would happen if they just like went all the way into it with the title.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of directors out there that I feel like haven't done like a straight up horror game, but would be really exceptional at it. And I think Miyazaki is one of those people for sure. Like he tackled all the gothic horror themes like really really well in Bloodborne. and there's like genuinely like creepy or unsettling moments
Hmm.
in a lot of games.
Yeah.
So I think honestly, like I played I know Shibuya was on 2, but I played Dark Souls 2 and I was kind of powering through it. And I remember I got to the forest, like probably at like 2 or 3 in the morning,
Yeah.
and that actually like freaked me out.
Hmm.
I wasn't ready for that. It was just like the all the fog, and then you start seeing the faces on the trees,
Yeah.
and then things are hitting you, and you can't see where they're coming
Yeah.
from. It like there's just some weird stuff that they do that I
Yeah.
think would translate really well.
Yeah, I remember I when Dark Souls 3 came out, I did the thing on Xbox where I made like I bought Dark Souls 3 in the Japanese region, and then I just switched it back to English, and it just made it English for me so I could just play it. And I was playing at night mostly, and I got to the Irithyll dungeon at night, and that like weird baby faced dragon thing,
Oh yeah,
it gave me
so hang it on the wall.
yeah,
Yeah,
it scared the shit out of me, and I couldn't sleep like all night after seeing that, just because that like From Software look with that weird
yeah,
baby face, and just like your character with their like ambient like light, and just like seeing that big face pop out of like near the top of the wall was just like, it was like one of the most horrifying things I've had in games, because I jumped so bad. So I like, yeah, just imagining them doing a whole game of trying to like scare me with some more baby faced dragon things I'm all for it, even though
yeah.
it wouldn't be great.
I'm still waiting for my Kojima horror game too, whenever that comes
Yeah,
out. But
I
yeah,
know.
I feel like there's such a good understanding
Yeah,
that like it's weird. Like I feel like a lot of my favorite horror comes from people that like that's not their primary genre.
yeah.
They just like understand
Hmm.
how it works without like trying to really make it about horror. It just is like an
Yeah,
element of whatever they're creating.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah,
It's a
totally.
whole other conversation. I can do a whole podcast on horror, so
I know, I
don't
know,
get me started.
I know. I was starting to think. I was like, oh, like you mentioned Twin Peaks, and like I think like season 3 of Twin Peaks has some of my favorite like horror imagery that I've seen in like the
Yeah,
last 10 years, and I'm like, but yeah, that's a whole other. That's a whole other.
yeah. David Lynch is just
Yeah,
like a master at that stuff. So
yeah. It's that
he's
unsettling surrealism that it seems like it's sort of a, and as someone who, it sounds like, you have some like connection with Twin Peaks. I couldn't help. I've made the comparison a few times, and I don't know if it's totally off base, but like Mark Frost in Twin Peaks is like the ideas guy who comes up with all the backstory in the world and to make it make sense. And then Lynch came in with like, to make everything give it heart and like emotion. And I can't help but just hope for like Elden Ring that Martin kind of gets to be the Frost and provide a framework, and then From Software comes in with just their really great
yeah,
art direction and their way of telling stories, and just it all blends to give you that nice balance that is like there's something back there, but it doesn't totally matter. But if you want to dig into it, it's sort of there for you to get into.
yeah.
So
It's super interesting that you brought that up because I was actually talking to my friend about Mark Frost recently,
mm,
and about David Lynch and stuff, and they definitely almost had like different agendas with the
yeah,
direction they wanted to take the story in.
yep,
But I almost love the series for that.
yeah,
I know that a lot of people don't like Mark Frost writing necessarily, or that like they lean more towards one writer or the other
yeah,
for like how they feel the series or what they feel the series is about.
mm,
Um, but I almost feel like having these two different perspectives on like a single story is so like interesting,
yeah,
because you're getting two different creators'
yep,
ideas. Like
mm,
I don't know, it's very cool, and it makes consuming, I guess, the message of the art
yeah,
like a lot more stimulating. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. No,
There's a lot of different.
yeah, because
It can be confusing.
it's not exactly a tension, but it is like there is a pull there that I think does make it interesting. And it's not to make it like a Twin Peaks discussion, but like season 3, like all the economic stuff, there's 100% Mark Frost, and his agenda was
Yeah,
very much about how the economics of capitalism had basically destroyed small town America. And then Lynch is very interesting as an American person. He like in some ways he sort of embodies like this like weird, he likes this like American dream thing, but then like twisting it. So they come from similar zones, but they're obviously very different in how they want to express that. And like
Yes.
season 3, but that's sort of the hope that like, I sort of hope that I feel like Martin and From Software both really love fantasy and tackling similar things like dragons and weird trees. Like they have similar topics they like going after. And like From Software has plenty of like political, like I think Bloodborne is a very political game, and how they represent cosmic horror is very much like people trying to transcend and all the people that they're willing to trample in order to get to
Oh
transcendence.
yeah.
So it's
No,
really interesting.
it's my favorite Lovecraft inspired media hands down, because it
Yeah.
almost flipped the Lovecraft narrative on
Yeah.
its head, where it was like about Lovecraft as an author,
Yeah.
because he was effectively trampling on
Yeah.
like tons of indigenous cultures,
Yep.
and like, very, very racist,
Yep.
very, very like, you know, anti-Semitic, just
Yep.
like all around bad, horrible person.
Yeah.
But then, they wrote that kind of horror from the perspective of somebody who's kind of seeing like,
Yeah.
oh, they were searching for the ultimate truth, but they were also punishing
Yeah.
people that, you know, had like kind of a more, traditional or older culture,
Yeah.
um, and didn't bother to like respect them, or,
Exactly.
yeah. So I don't know, like it's so clear that Miyazaki has just like a love for stories. So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how it turns out.
Me too. And I think with that, let's watch the trailer. We'll watch the announcement trailer today, and
Yay.
we can. All right. Have you watched this very often, or did you see it when it was announced and just?
Yeah, I did. It's been a while since I've seen this one.
Yeah. It's a good one. I like the music here a lot, and you mentioned Demon Souls is sort of your thing, and as much as I like Dark Souls music, like Demon Souls, like especially the original, like
Yeah.
oof, and like Kingsfield, I think it's just very rhythmic, but like weird, and I don't know if it makes sense for Elden Ring, but I'd love some of that to just find its way back.
Yeah, there's
I doubt.
I'll talk to you more about music after
Yeah.
the trailer. I don't want to like interrupt for people watching this.
That which commanded the stars, giving life its fullest brilliance. The Elden Ring. Oh, Elden Ring. Shattered by someone or something. Don't tell me you don't see it. Look up at the sky. It burns.
Yay.
They have it. 673 days later.
I know.
Oh man. But yeah, I think the music slaps in that. That's half the reason I keep coming back, is because it's certainly not exactly a Demon Souls music, but it's got more of that percussive tones.
Yeah.
And I could use more of a percussive feel in the music. I don't think Dark Souls it was more like choral and like, bombastic, and I don't know, over the course of the series it just became a little more anonymous to me. It was hard for me to really pick out, and maybe that's because there were so many games, but like Demon Souls and Kingsfield music, I hands down just take those.
I've actually been talking with a lot of friends, like that kind of do music either professionally or like hobby wise, about a lot of their main inspirations, and a lot of their inspirations come from older video game music,
Yeah.
and a lot of that has to do with like the fact that music was so compressed that they really had to work with like there's only so much you could work with
Yeah.
with instruments and electronic music back in the day. And so you really had to make your melodies like pop. Like
Yeah.
you really had to make that like kind of hook the listener's ear
Yeah.
to be memorable or to stand out. Um, and it's kind of why like to this day, some of my favorite music is like older video game music or video game music that is replicating kind of like that older video game sound,
Yeah.
or music that really focuses on the melody. And I think kind of going back to the Nier, bringing up Nier again, hands down like the best video game soundtrack I've ever heard. But a lot of it has to do with Emmy Evans, the vocalist. And then, looking back to Demon Souls, a lot of the kind of like weird like melodies that the bosses had and the weird instrumentation that was used, like the harpsichord and all of those kinds of like specific sounds that invoke like a certain feeling. Like Fool's Idol, even though she takes place in a cathedral, like the fight takes place in a cathedral, the harpsichord and some of the other images that you see also invoke like that Eastern spirituality,
Yeah.
or that Eastern like folklore. So it was super. I don't know. I like they're so good at making those sounds resonate with like what you're seeing and like what you're feeling. But I agree that like as like gaming capabilities kind of advance, we start seeing more orchestral music, and it kind of gets away from like really having to like work super hard to get your listeners to feel a certain thing or to hear a certain thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope that they go back because I don't know. The Demon Souls remake, I have a lot of opinions about Maiden Asturia's theme. I have so many opinions.
Yeah, I don't. I Maiden Asturia's theme. I really love the original, and I don't think adding more to it does anything for me at all.
No, and I think also too that I remember when I first, when you first enter the fog gate, and like the organ is just so loud. It's like dun, 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 like really really loud, like right when you walk in and you're like, okay, like you walk in and it's like paired with the imagery where you see like all the blood waterfalls and like the people like worshiping and stuff. It's so intense. It's like so much. You're just like, whoa, okay. But it's good because it like sticks with you, like it really drives home that moment. But when I played the remake and you kind of walk through the foggate, the music like slowly swells. It takes a really long time to pick up, and it's just not it doesn't like drive that impactful. Like I had an emotional response to the first one, and then it tied in with the story and like everything else just made it that much more impactful. But I don't even remember like how I don't know, it was so weird. It's so weird. Orchestral music doesn't make your game better.
I feel the same way. It's just that original, and that is an interesting thing. And a lot of my complaints are how much slower they build in the Demon Souls remake, and I still think it's good music, but like, and I can listen to it when I'm not playing the game. But if I'm in the game, especially, I like played through the original right before going into the remake, and I was like, it's not the same. And there's always that part of like that nostalgia factor. But as I interrogated that, I was like, no, like the Maiden Astrea theme in particular, just it does exactly what it needs to do, and it's not adding any frills, and it just hits so hard the whole time. And sort of bringing up Maiden Astrea in general is one thing that I'm curious about, is especially as someone who like likes Demon Souls so much, is like Demon Souls sort of gets some shit for like gimmick bosses and how the replayability, but like I do think and this I don't know if you've watched Matthew Matosis's videos on like Demon Souls, because he also has a preference towards Demon Souls and then he likes Dark Souls 1, but he feels like the series sort of goes a different direction than what he is looking for. And when it comes to Elden Ring, like I like Dark Souls 3, but the boss fights and a lot of the stuff, like the way they accommodated the players was dealing with a more experienced player base, and I felt like it was mostly about them trying to punish you and make more duel fights and like Artorias stuff and dealing with offbeat attacks. But like they moved so far away from like a Maiden Estrella fight, and I just feel like
Yes.
that's something I would like to just get back there, is where it's not necessarily a super tough fight, but like the emotional and narrative beat is still just like so strong. It's more about the story and how that feels than necessarily the complication of what you're doing with your hands.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually kind of why I don't want to say it's like fully why I stopped making lore videos, or that it's fully why I kind of became it's I'm still invested in the series. I play them on launch and
Yeah.
am like super excited, but I have noticed I played through Sekiro on stream with everybody, and um it feels like a rhythm game. Like a lot of it comes down to memorizing the boss's AI,
Yeah.
what attacks the boss does in specific, like where you're located. Are you behind the boss? What is its logic going to do? Is it going to do like a backward swipe? Like it's a matter of understanding how the AI works in order to like complete it.
Yeah.
And from a developer perspective, or from somebody that works in the game industry, and from someone that like has to do all this, like deal with a lot of that stuff on a day-to-day basis, like I am kind of the bridge between QA testers and developers. Once a QA team is done, I would like continue to test the game, and then also have participants and study groups, like focus groups, test the game. And like understanding and like having to sit in a room and play a game for 13 hours to figure out a boss's AI. It's like when I come home at the end of the day, I don't want to do that. Like
Yeah.
anybody can do it. I think that that's the thing, is that like it's seen as this very difficult series, but like anybody can do it. It's just a matter of like being persistent and dedicating yourself to learning the pattern. And if I want to play a game like that, I'm going to play Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
That's just at the end of the day, I'm going to go play Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
But like with Maiden Estrella and with those puzzle boss fights, I almost feel like they gave more to like the story building and the storytelling aspect of those encounters. So like the Fool's Idol, if you didn't kill
Yeah.
the guy up top on the balcony,
Yeah.
you're gonna fight her again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And the first time I played through the game, I didn't do that, and
Yeah.
it added this whole other layer of like, oh my gosh, like she's not real. Like why are they keeping her alive? Like what purpose is she being like resurrected and like kept
Yeah.
alive? And then you read the Archstone and you're like, oh my gosh, she's there to like manipulate everybody who lives
Yeah.
there, or everybody that's in that kingdom. Like you start to like kind of learn about how those game mechanics tie into the story. And I wish that there was more of that. I would like them to continue to do those skill-based fights, like in Sekiro. Like if you want to do like a rhythm game, fine, but like also add some like puzzle elements or storytelling elements. Like maybe if you like is it I keep wanting to say Gearman with the music box in Bloodborne.
Oh yeah, for oh my god, Gascoigne.
Gascoigne. Yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, like that game is a game that's very skill based.
Yeah.
But you have little things like the music box where you can stun him because he remembers the sound of like things that assist, like his children. Like, forget if it was his son or daughter. I think it's a daughter.
Yeah,
like
his daughter gives you the box, and then
the music box. Yeah. I forgot what gender, but yeah, it's like it reminds him of his kid.
Yeah.
And he takes his second, and it's like there's those little puzzle things that really do add a lot. And also boss mechanics that play into the boss's actual visual design. So the adjudicator's weak spot being the bird on its head, and then you learn about all the lore regarding, the Shrine of Storms. Like if you kill birds, you become like the punished, like your soul isn't worthy to be a warrior. And how the bird is like the deity that judges you, kind of. I thought that just little things, and then the Sparkly the Crow living there. It's just like little things like that bring the whole world together, and I think as like somebody that loves design, it just works. It just works, and I wish there was more.
yeah, exactly, because I can understand why you would come off of stuff like Ornstein and Smo and Artorias and get such a strong fan reaction to those fights, but also
Yeah.
recognizing that like there's other beats that led up to those fights being the way they are, and just like having them stand out. Like and Matthew Matosis in his video talked about how like Dancer of the Boreal Valley is a pretty cool fight, because she moves weirdly and she has that like ethereal sort of presence. But by the time you get to her in a normal playthrough, you've kind of fought bosses who have weird rhythms. So like her whole thing is how weird she moves and how like graceful but like deadly she is. But you've already fought like Pontiff, who's like not graceful, but like he moves weirdly and he punishes you. So it just, the idea of like not every fight has to be that big duel thing, but I do understand too as a developer dealing with some like being, for better or for worse, known for being challenging, and how do you deal with a player base who is getting so good at tackling challenging bosses. But that's why I hope with Elden Ring, my own sort of, as I've been thinking about this, I hope that they expand the mechanics to provide new challenges. Like you mentioned with Sekiro, I feel like that changed things enough and in a fundamental way where I thought it was super hard the first time I played, but then over the course of the game, I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a rhythm game. And then you play again and you know the bosses. And I personally think Sekiro is not too hard on subsequent playthroughs. It's just, it's a rougher first encounter, and that's in part because it was challenging things in a different way. So I'm hoping that even though Elden Ring, Miyazaki has said the foundation is Souls combat, I'm hoping that there's enough new mechanics or that they approach challenge in different ways than just like, how do we, instead of just ramping up challenge for familiar elements, provide new challenges to make the experience more novel.
Yeah, I would really love to see, that's why I think I would really love to see them do an Armored Core,
Yeah.
just because it's like totally,
Yeah,
it's totally different.
Yeah.
But, once again, it's like, you'd also love to see the people that create just do things that they enjoy.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. But yeah, if I feel like if Miyazaki's like thinking about doing, other aspects or like other titles within the FromSoft kind of like franchise, it would be cool to see.
Yeah.
To see those come back, or like Kuon or any of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on today. This has been really, really great to just chat about Elden Ring, and sort of the discussion for me has been more about like, it's interesting because it's been over 5 years since there was like a Dark Souls game. So it's been a little while now, and it's just interesting getting different people's perspectives about, as especially the fan base has, these games have been part of our lives for like a decade plus, like, what it's like to sort of imagine them tackling Dark Souls again, but not Dark Souls, and just how they will differentiate it. So it's been really great just hearing your thoughts, especially because I don't think I've had a whole lot of Demon Souls support from my guests.
Yeah.
So it's nice to get the Demon Souls perspective.
I think that for people that didn't play Demon Souls first, it is a rough transition to go backwards because the AI is not as sophisticated. Yeah. At most, it has like, a 1-2-3 logic, or like 1-2-3, and then it branches off into like 1-2 or something. But it's nowhere near as sophisticated. I remember when Fume Knight was like the most sophisticated thing we had. Yeah. And Dark Souls 2, but I think that there's that memorization chain or memorization logic that I think that players really miss, and then they also feel like the game is very clunky, and it's a rough ride. But for people that started off with that series, it holds such a special place, I think, in everybody's hearts because of the way it tells stories.
It's so interesting, and it's, I always do this, I tangent as I'm wrapping up, but it'll be really interesting too for people. Like, I was thinking like, oh, what if, Elden Ring, especially with George R. R. Martin, might bring a lot of people to the Souls games who are coming because they like fantasy, and they may connect with it in a way that they haven't thought. And I'm just like, at this point, you play Elden Ring, you really like that. Who knows what it's like at this point? But now imagining going back to like Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, it's starting to be a bigger ask for, player base who was like in middle school or less when those games came out, and just like, it's probably just the thing as someone who's getting older in general. It's just like, oh, I really want you to love this thing, but also I can kind of understand now, like, if Elden Ring really fulfills this like big open world, like, as much as I hate to say it, like, is Dark Souls 1 still gonna hit for someone when there's like an open world version that may do some of the same things the world design of Dark Souls did, but on a bigger scale, more polished? Like, it's hard to say, but
Oh yeah, even for me, it's kind of difficult to go back and play Dark Souls 1. There's
yeah,
a weird gap kind of between Sen's Fortress and Londo, where like if you don't get the lightning spear, things just are kind of difficult on your first kind
yeah,
of run through to like get your build up to a certain point,
yeah,
unless you really know where everything absolutely is and like you know where all the enemies are and you're able to just speed run through it all. But there's just that I was trying to get a couple of friends to play through with me for their first time because it came out on Switch and a lot of my friends
yeah,
had a Switch. And I was like, okay, you got to get the lightning spear, and they're like, but I don't want to get the lightning spear. I want my two-handed bastard sword, and I'm like, but you can't.
yeah,
You just can't until we get
yeah,
the upgrade materials. So it really like bottlenecks you. Like you get kind of stuck
yeah,
at this spot until you get through,
yeah,
and you're just like,
oh yeah,
I don't know. It has some balance issues. It has some like flow issues,
yeah,
and it has some like just parts of the game that don't feel great.
yeah. Yeah, I remember I was totally that person with the Drake sword and the Elite Knight set going against Ornstein and Smo, and that's where I put down the game the first time, because I got there and I was like I was playing alongside my roommate, and he was doing like a Dex build, and I was like, this game is broken, and I actually remember saying to him like, oh, the game obviously favors Dex because you're doing so much better, and then just like, no, it's just I was using the Elite Knight set and the Drake sword, and I didn't understand scaling, and
Yep.
and it's that exact point in the game where if you don't understand those mechanics, it really starts to beat your ass for it.
Yeah, it definitely really starts to punish you. And I remember when the game had first come out, like the straight like first launch of it, elemental weapons were just like super overpowered,
Yeah,
like right out the gate. And then there was also like Tranquil Walk of Peace,
yeah,
original Tranquil Walk of Peace that was just brutal. And so I would get friends playing through the first time, and like somebody would invade them with Tranquil Walk of Peace, and it
yeah,
would just like ruin their whole day. They were like, "What is the point of this game?
yeah,
This game sucks." Like this person slowed me down, and I couldn't roll or do anything, and they just got to like
yeah,
murder me. I don't.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
it's
yeah,
just
yeah, they've come a long ways in a lot of
yeah,
respects, but there is, obviously with certain things, other things sort of fall to the wayside, and it is interesting to see, because a lot of people hope that Elden Ring is going to give them that Dark Souls experience again, but at this point, I'm like, when you think of the community, what is the Dark Souls experience? And depending who you talk to,
different.
very different versions of a game. Like, even people I talk to, who a lot of people I know really love Dark Souls 3 the most, and I totally get what they like about Dark Souls 3 the most. And then and then I go to Dark Souls 1 and I say like, oh, Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne and Demon Souls are sort of where I live, and then they say I'm old and I just like it because of nostalgia. But it's that
Yeah,
it is what you value out of that and how it's changed, and I can't knock someone for enjoying the polish. So it'll be interesting to see if
oh yeah,
Elden Ring can kind of marry up some of those things and give a fresh story, and maybe it'll capture that. But I'm also, as with everything, some people are going to hate it, and it'll be interesting to pull apart what doesn't work and what does work, and just to see where From
yeah,
Software is at as a company now versus even 5 years ago. I feel like they're in a totally different position, and it's going to be fascinating to see like what that looks like, because Miyazaki and his presidency are now in full swing there. Since the last time they made Dark Souls, he was just barely had switched positions, or he hadn't even fully moved up yet. So it'll just be totally interesting to see what it's like in this next phase. Sekiro kind of kicked it off, but now Elden Ring is going to show us something we're all very familiar with, but like a new From Software, or like, riding off of that super success of their series, what sort of like fantasy game they make now. And I don't think it'll be, as much as people say the leak trailer looks like Dark Souls 4, I'm like, I really feel like it's going to be familiar but totally different, especially for those who followed
yeah.
it a long time.
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's gonna feel
Yeah.
a little different for
Yep.
sure.
But yeah, so now that I've tangented, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And so where can people find you on the internet?
So I actually don't go by Quelaag anymore, even though I'm choosing to go by that for this interview. My new username that I tend to use, I'm actually remaking a YouTube channel now where I'm not going to actually be posting lore. So I'm trying to branch away from Quelaag, and I'm using the handle. It's my Twitter handle. It's Ingenue, but it's spelled with an X in front of it. Um, it was like the worst handle I could have picked because it's impossible to spell and pronounce for a lot of people. But yeah, Ingenue on I'm currently on Instagram and Twitter, but I'm going to be making a YouTube, and then I'll probably just be doing like really random videos like unboxings and I make gunpla
Yeah.
and um, like general kind of like hobby collector stuff.
Awesome.
I think that it's just where I'm at in my life right
Oh yeah,
now.
the last like year or so especially, it's all
Mhm.
about like this is where I'm at in my life and this is what I'm gonna do. So I completely support
Yeah.
that. I'll have all that linked below for anyone who's interested, especially if the spelling throws you off. You can find it down there, so no worries. But once again, thank you so much for coming on. Just chatting souls for a while.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, and so everyone, at the end, I just want to plug I'm still running an Able Gamers charity. It goes until April 15th, so this will come out Monday, and then so Thursday of this week, when this first comes out, the charity will be ending, and I'm going to do a live stream to hopefully push that at the end, but just that'll also be in the description for anyone looking to donate to help people overcome barriers so that they can also play the Souls games and whatever games they want to play. It's all good to me. But so yeah, Quail, thank you so much for coming on, and see y'all later.
Thank you.